Welcome to Excel Magic Trick number 1493, part 2. Hey, just like we did in our last video, we need to allocate invoice header amounts to the transaction line item table. So here's our invoice level table. This is a transaction table or a fact table, and we have shipping cost and invoice discount for the entire invoice. And somehow we need to allocate down to the line item transaction or fact table so that each invoice has the correct allocation of shipping and discount, so we can use the product table to make this report. Now, the fundamental problem here is the grain or the granularity of each table. This is the invoice level. This is the invoice detail or line level. Now, last video, we used a bunch of helper columns, Excel formulas, and pivot tables. But in this video, we are going to see these epic array formulas to solve this problem. Now, obviously, the drawback to array formulas is that they are complicated. And actually, this one, we will visually see that it takes a long time to calculate. Now, this is a series of videos we're going to do to solve this problem. And here's all of the different videos. Now, let's go over to the sheet Excel solution. Now, in our last video, here's the base table with the two invoice level amounts. And we created 1, 2, 3 different helper columns. One for total invoice sales, then the percentage sales discount, and the total weight for shipping the invoice. Then we went over to the detail line fact table and calculated 1, 2, 3 different columns. But in this video, we only want to calculate 2 columns, line discount and line shipping. Now we're going to scroll way over to the side. Now we have our 2 tables. This is the invoice level, and this is the line level. Here's our 2 columns. Now, the fundamental problem when doing just 2 columns is somehow we're going to have to simulate over here the invoice level calculations. Now, think about what we did last video. There's only one invoice here, so we had to calculate only one time the total sales and the total weight. When we come over to this side and decide to do everything in a single column, that means we're going to repeat that total sales invoice calculation, for example, 1, 2, 3 times. That's one of the reasons that these formulas will take a long time to calculate. All right, so let's start with line discount. I want to allocate this. Well, if I had the total sales, I'd simply take invoice discount divided by total sales, and that would give me the percentage. Then because I have quantity and unit price, I simply multiply those by the discount. All right, the first thing we're going to try and do is calculate total sales for the invoice. And the formula we're going to use is exactly the same one we used last video. For each line, for each invoice number, we're going to need to pick out the correct quantity and units, multiply, and then add them. The product part is the multiplying. The sum part is the adding. Now, array 1. Well, I'm going to highlight the entire column. Control Shift down arrow F4, comma. I need to multiply that first array by the second array. Price. Control Shift down arrow F4, comma. Now, in the third array, I need to pick out for this line, based on that one invoice number, the correct rows. So just like we did last video, I highlight the invoice number column. Control Shift down arrow F4. And I ask the question, are any of you equal to the invoice number? Now, that will yield trues and falses, and some product cannot handle trues and falses. We need 1s and 0s. So we can convert trues and falses in Excel to 1s and 0s with any math operation. We're going to use double negative because that's usually the fastest and most efficient. So there we go. Those are 1s and 0s telling us the correct rows for the particular invoice. There's the price, the units. Some product will do the rest. Close parentheses, Control Enter. Now, when I double click and send that down, you can see it took a second to calculate, and we had to repeat 3 different times the same calculation we did last video, only 1 time. Now that's the denominator, F2. We need to look up invoice discount amount as the numerator. So VLOOKUP, we're looking up invoice number, comma, the table. First 3 rows, Control Shift down arrow, F4, comma. The third column has our discount amount, comma, 0 for exact match, close parentheses, and then divide. Discount amount, total invoice amount, the division, Control Enter, double click and send it down. Now we have exactly the correct discount percentage, the number of pennies, in this case 6.5, for every $1 of sales. Now we simply multiply these by quantity and unit price. F2, and at the end, times quantity times unit price. That will work. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. And if we highlight these first 3 and look down to the status bar, 144.18, that's exactly equal to the invoice discount amount. All right, so we have line discount. Now on to the much harder array formula. And the trick here is how are we going to get the total weight of the invoice in each one of these cells? Well, the trick is I'm going to have to do a massive array calculation and look up simultaneously from this column every single one of the weights from this lookup table, and then multiply it by quantity. And then for each one of these lines, just like we did in this formula, we'll have to isolate it based on invoice number. So that means unlike taking these 2 columns and multiplying for total sales, we're going to have to take this times the correct multiple weights for the correct products. All right, you ready? The first thing we have to do, since we do not have a column of all the weights, is we're going to have to do a huge array formula to simultaneously look up every single one of these weights from the lookup table. And we do not use a lookup function. We actually use the SUMIFS function. Now, SUMIFS can be used for looking stuff up if there are no duplicates, and they're not. This is a lookup table. Now, SUMRANGE, I'm going to highlight the weights and then hit the F4 key, comma. The criteria range, it's the first column of the lookup table. F4 to lock it, comma. And this is where we do a huge function argument array operation. Now, criteria 1 usually gets just 1 condition, but we're going to give it the entire column of products. Control Shift down arrow, F4. That's the whole trick here. We give this argument many products to look up to find a match in this unique list, so that every time it sees Sunbell, SUMIFS will add for that Sunbell in that range, not really add, but return that 3.5. So it's the function argument array operation simultaneously returning many answers, 1 for each criteria we gave the criteria 1 argument. This, in essence, is building a helper column right inside our formula. Now let's hit F9 to evaluate this. Wow, that is a huge resultant array. And you actually can't even see the top one. If we look up in the formula bar, 6.5, 5.5, and 3.5. Those are the correct 3 weights for that invoice. So we need to, from that huge array, pick out just the correct weights for the particular invoice. Control Z to undo that. Now, that's just a helper column we're putting inside of some product. Some product, those are all the weights for every single product, comma. We're going to have to put every single quantity for every single product. Control Shift down arrow, F4. Now, if I close parentheses, right now some product will give us the total weight for every single line item transaction. And that's not what we want. So right at the end, comma to get to array 3, double negative, open parentheses, highlight invoice number, Control Shift down arrow F4. Then I ask the question, how many of you are equal to that given invoice? Close parentheses. The third array gives us ones and zeros. Those ones and zeros, when multiplied by the first two arrays, will give us exactly the correct 3 weights for each line. Sum product will add them, and Control Enter. 743 is the correct total weight for that invoice. Now watch what happens when I double click and send it down. You can see there was a little delay there because this is a huge array formula. And if we go down a few cells and hit F2, we're verifying the ranges and cell references. Those are looking good. But that's a huge array formula. In essence, think about what we had to do. We had to calculate every single weight and then just pick out 1, 2, 3 for that first line right there, 743. Then we had to do the same calculation again for the next 743. Escape. Now, we need to calculate the different allocation percentage for each weight for each line. In the top cell, F2, I need to calculate after the equal sign in the numerator the total weight for this line. So I'm going to VLOOKUP and look up product, comma, within this table right here. F4 to lock it, comma. The weight is in the 4th column. 4, comma, 0, close parentheses. That VLOOKUP is just looking up the weight for Sunbel. Now I need to multiply the weight times Sunbel times the quantity for this transaction. Now I need parentheses to isolate that multiplication. So I put parentheses and then divide. The top part right here is the weight for this line. The bottom part is the total weight for the invoice. Control Enter. And watch this. This is going to take even more time. Double click and send it down. Those 3 allocation percentages are based on the weight. We can multiply those by the shipping amount, 98.87, and it will break it apart correctly, allocating to each line based on weight. And notice this one also is correctly 1, because there is only 1 line for this invoice. F2, and at the end, times VLOOKUP. And we're going to look up the invoice number, comma, the table, that's this table over here, Control Shift down arrow F4, comma. And shipping amount is in the 2nd column, so I type a 2, comma, 0, close parentheses. Now look at this. We actually did a VLOOKUP from this many side, meaning there's many invoice numbers, over to the one side to get shipping. And we did a VLOOKUP in the top, looking up product from the many side over to the lookup table or the one side to get the correct weight. And then we did a whole huge lookup inside of there. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. Boy, that took a long time to calculate. Highlight these 3 cells. Look down to the status bar. Exactly the total for that one invoice. We have correctly allocated both shipping and discount to the line level. The granularity here, invoice. The granularity here, product or invoice line level. Now we have no problem. We can come down here and do our formula to calculate the totals for each product. Equals sum ifs, sum range, line discount first. Control Shift down arrow F4. F4 again to lock just the row but not the column. That way it'll move when I copy to the side. Comma. Criteria range, product. Control Shift down arrow F4 just one time. Comma. Criteria, there's the product. We need to hit the F4 and lock it 1, 2, 3 times, locking the column but not the row. Close parentheses. Control Enter. Copy it to the side. Double click and send it down. Go to the last cell, F2. I'm verifying all of the ranges. Wow, that was crazy. We got our product report properly allocating discount and shipping. And we saw 2 crazy array formulas. Look at that one. Now, I don't know when I would do this one very often because it's too hard to create in the first place. And anything beyond a couple thousand rows is just going to take too long to calculate. The version we did last video and the next few versions with DAX and Power Query will be much more efficient. All right, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and sub, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excel is Fun, including our next video where we'll get to use DAX. All right, see you next video.